August 1945. The summer sun beats down on a small airfield just outside Tokyo. Dust swirls along cracked tarmac as rows of Japanese training aircraft sit silently, their propellers still. A group of young women, uniformed in tents, stand in formation beside the planes they have trained on for years. Their hands clutch flight logs and leather helmets, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the horizon. A jeep appears at the edge of the field, painted in olive drab, its engine low and steady. Out step a handful of American officers, faces calm, polite, even smiling. Orders are delivered, crisp and precise. The planes are grounded. Every pilot must surrender their aircraft. For these women, trained in skill, honor, and discipline, the command feels like a blow they cannot parry. Their aircraft, their pride, their secret defiance, their dreams of flight, are suddenly objects to be handed over. And yet, the Americans offer no scorn, no shouting, no threats. Just calm efficiency and, disturbingly, a smile. In that moment, the weight of defeat meets the strange, disarming courtesy of the victors. The silence of the airfield is broken only by the low hum of engines, now forbidden to fly. This is where their story begins. In the years leading up to World War II, aviation in Japan had grown from a novelty into a symbol of national pride and technological ambition. By the mid-1930s, Japan had invested heavily in both military and civilian aviation programs, establishing flight schools, aeronautical research centers, and pilot training academies. Air power was glorified as the future of warfare, and young men and women alike were encouraged to participate, though opportunities for women were far more limited. Female aviators in Japan were often trained in specialized schools. Organizations such as the Japan Women's Aviation League provided rigorous instruction in flight mechanics, navigation, and glider operations. Students learned to pilot trainers like the K-5Y Willow, a biplane used extensively for basic flight training, and the Ki-55 Advanced Trainer. These aircraft were sturdy, forgiving, and emblematic of Japan's growing industrial capabilities. Though barred from combat roles, women pilots were expected to serve as auxiliaries, ferrying aircraft, transporting documents, conducting reconnaissance, and assisting in glider training programs. Culturally, female pilots carried the dual burden of national expectation and personal ambition. Japan's militaristic society revered discipline, hierarchy, and honor. Yet aviation offered women a rare avenue for visibility and accomplishment. The women who trained at these schools were often in their late teens or early 20s, their youth matched by fierce determination. Their instructors emphasized precision, endurance, and the unspoken responsibility of representing their country. By 1940, Japan was fully engaged in the Second Sino-Japanese War. Aviation became increasingly militarized, and male pilots dominated combat roles. Fuel rationing, resource allocation, and strategic priorities meant that women were restricted to training and auxiliary functions. Still, the role carried prestige within Japan. Female pilots were celebrated in magazines, propaganda posters, and occasional newsreels. They embodied both technological progress and national pride, symbols of modernity within a society increasingly defined by conflict. At the same time, the world beyond Japan's shores was moving toward total war. The early 1940s saw rapid escalation in Europe and the Pacific. Japan's victories in China and later Southeast Asia created a temporary sense of confidence. But the Allied powers, especially the United States, were mobilizing unprecedented industrial and military might. By 1943, American air and naval forces had begun to challenge Japanese supremacy across the Pacific, introducing long-range bombing campaigns, carrier-based operations, and technological innovations that would soon overwhelm Japan's defensive capabilities. Despite these external pressures, Japan's female aviation programs continued. Training schedules became more intensive. Flight instructors stressed efficiency and skill, preparing their students for auxiliary operations in increasingly hostile skies. The women practiced takeoffs, landings, and navigation exercises with a sense of pride, unaware of the approaching collapse that would soon render their hard-won expertise obsolete. Fuel shortages and material scarcity gradually limited flight hours. Aircraft maintenance became a constant struggle. By 1944, many auxiliary airfields were dispersed into rural areas to avoid Allied bombing raids. The pilots adapted, flying gliders or older trainers with limited performance. Yet the camaraderie among them remained strong. Bonds forged in the cockpit and the hangar carried a deep emotional weight, reinforcing the sense of purpose that defined their lives. By mid-1945, Japan's strategic position had deteriorated rapidly. American forces had captured key islands across the Pacific, and the firebombing of Japanese cities caused widespread devastation. The Japanese military's command structure was under immense strain, and morale was collapsing. Within this context, female pilots continued to train and operate, largely removed from the front lines, but still embodying the nationalistic ideals of discipline, duty, and honor. As the months progressed toward August 1945, the inevitability of defeat became clear to those in command. The war's trajectory, dictated by overwhelming American industrial power, air superiority, and naval dominance, left Japanese aviators, including women, preparing for a world in which their skills might no longer be valued, their aircraft grounded, and their personal ambitions subordinated to the reality of surrender. The stage was set for a moment of profound confrontation, not with bombs or bullets, but with the quiet, precise authority of the occupying American forces. This confrontation would not be violent, but it would be humiliating, marking the end of an era for Japan's female pilots, and the beginning of a story defined by unexpected courtesy and disarmament. The final months of World War II brought unprecedented strain to Japan's air operations. By early 1945, the once dominant Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces were stretched thin. Continuous Allied bombing campaigns had destroyed factories, airfields, and logistical hubs. Fuel was scarce, aircraft were aging, and replacement parts were difficult or impossible to procure. Training programs were curtailed, and even experienced pilots were grounded due to material shortages. For female aviators, this meant fewer flights, limited maintenance support, and a growing awareness that their roles, though honorable, were increasingly symbolic. In the summer of 1945, as the Allies closed in on the Japanese home islands, a distinct psychological shift occurred. The Allied strategy of island hopping and air superiority had left Japan vulnerable, and morale among military personnel deteriorated rapidly. Women pilots, who had trained meticulously for years, now watched as their operational airfields were abandoned or repurposed. Many were reassigned to ferry duties, transporting aircraft between dispersed airstrips, while others remained on standby, ready to assist in administrative or logistical capacities. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki shocked Japan into surrender. The announcement on August 15th of Emperor Hirohito's broadcast confirmed the nation's defeat. For Japan's air forces, male and female alike, this was an abrupt, existential pivot. Pilots who had spent years preparing for war were suddenly tasked with disarmament. The aircraft that symbolized personal skill, national pride, and technological achievement were now liabilities, awaiting confiscation or grounding. The occupying American forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, implemented policies that combined strict control with deliberate civility. Their orders for disarmament extended to all Japanese military personnel, including female aviators. Aircraft were to be grounded systematically, airfields were to be cleared, and weapons, manuals, and other military equipment were to be surrendered. Yet, unlike the violence that characterized the earlier years of conflict, American officers approached the process with a calm, professional demeanor, often offering guidance and polite instructions rather than confrontation. Japanese women pilots confronted a paradox. They were being treated with a courtesy foreign to their military training, yet every polite gesture underscored their own loss of authority and prestige. Their aircraft, once extensions of personal skill and national pride, were now objects to be handed over to foreign forces. For many, this was a profound humiliation, intensified by cultural expectations of honor and stoicism. The contrast between their internal tension and the Americans' composed approach created a quiet drama that would define this transitional moment. The airfields themselves became symbolic theaters of this transition. Hangars once bustling with activity fell silent. Training aircraft, K-5YS, Ki-55s, and gliders stood idle, waiting for inspection or removal. Pilots gathered in small groups, sharing whispered reflections on what had been lost and what lay ahead. American patrols moved efficiently through the spaces, cataloging planes, supervising disarmament, and maintaining order, all while displaying a demeanor of respectful professionalism. It was in this environment that the Japanese female pilots' final moments of operational autonomy occurred. The grounding of aircraft, once a routine administrative act, now carried layers of emotional weight, personal disappointment, national humiliation, and a stark reminder of the war's conclusion. The pilots' dedication, skill, and ambition, years of training and practice, were rendered largely irrelevant in a single, organized occupation procedure. This period, though brief, encapsulated the broader transformation of Japan's military landscape. The collapse of air operations, the surrender of equipment, and the enforced subordination to occupying forces marked not just the end of a war, but the beginning of a new societal order. Female pilots, once symbols of innovation and national pride, became witnesses to a profound cultural and military shift. The moment was set for confrontation, calm, efficient, and humiliating in its quietness. The next phase would explore multiple angles of this experience: the human, technological, tactical, and cultural perspectives that shaped how these women confronted the grounding of their aircraft and the imposition of foreign authority. Point 1. Human angle. For the Japanese women pilots, the experience of being grounded was deeply personal. Many had begun their aviation journeys in adolescence, drawn to flight by fascination, ambition, and nationalistic fervor. They had trained relentlessly, mastering takeoffs, landings, navigation, and even glider operations in conditions that demanded both precision and courage. Their uniforms, helmets, and flight logs were not mere accessories. They were symbols of accomplishment and personal identity. When the American officers arrived, these symbols suddenly became objects of surrender. The pilots felt a mix of embarrassment, frustration, and helplessness. In a culture that prized discipline, obedience, and honor, having one's authority undermined by polite foreign soldiers was a psychological shock. Women who had once commanded small airfields or trained new pilots now found themselves waiting quietly while instructions were given, their hands empty, their expertise unrecognized. Witnesses described the subtle tension in their posture: shoulders squared, eyes lowered, hands gripping flight logs, lips pressed tightly. Though outwardly compliant, internally, many wrestled with humiliation. The quiet nature of the American orders, no shouting, no scolding, made the contrast all the sharper. Here were foreign officers treating them with respect, yet that very respect underscored the complete loss of operational control. For some, tears were held back. For others, a stubborn silence became a shield against visible shame. Point 4. American occupation protocols angle. The U.S. occupation of Japan, under General Douglas MacArthur, was designed to establish control with minimal hostility. For female Japanese pilots, this translated into an almost surreal experience. American officers arrived not with threats or aggressive posturing, but with calm, polite directives. Aircraft were to be grounded, airfields cleared, and military equipment cataloged and secured. Every instruction was delivered with clarity, yet the underlying authority was unmistakable. The Americans' approach reflected a deliberate policy. They understood that direct confrontation or humiliation could provoke resistance. Instead, efficiency, organization, and a calm demeanor underscored their power. Women pilots, trained to value discipline and hierarchy, recognized the paradox. The Americans were polite, yet every smile and measured tone reinforced their absolute authority. Grounding planes was executed with precision, demonstrating logistical superiority and psychological dominance without a single act of violence. 5. Psychological angle. The emotional impact on the Japanese women pilots was profound. These were individuals who had trained for years, invested sweat, skill, and ambition into mastering aircraft, and had internalized a culture of honor and pride. The act of surrendering their planes, done quietly, efficiently, and under polite supervision, triggered a deep sense of humiliation. Some pilots described feelings of emptiness, as though a part of their identity had been stripped away. Others struggled with frustration, anger, and disbelief. How could victory be so distant, yet defeat so calm, so procedural? The contrast between their internal turmoil and the Americans' composure intensified the psychological effect. In diaries and later testimonies, several pilots recounted silent moments of reflection, heads bowed in the sun beside the very planes they had once mastered. The calmness of the occupiers magnified the personal weight of surrender, making it not only a political or military act, but an intimate confrontation with failure, pride, and the end of a personal journey. 6. Cultural angle. The grounding of female Japanese pilots also revealed the collision of cultural paradigms. In Japan, military honor, hierarchy, and the concept of giri, duty/obligation, define behavior, especially for those serving the nation. Women pilots were taught to carry themselves with poise, precision, and obedience, embodying the ideals of loyalty and sacrifice. To be forced to relinquish their aircraft to foreign powers, even under polite circumstances, challenged these deeply ingrained values. American protocols, by contrast, reflected a different set of cultural expectations. The emphasis on efficiency, calm authority, and measured courtesy was alien to many Japanese personnel. This created an unsettling psychological tension. The pilots were not being punished or demeaned overtly, yet every gesture emphasized their loss of control and subordination. Even small actions, such as American officers inspecting a cockpit with casual interest or gesturing politely while pointing to a checklist, communicated a subtle, almost unbearable humiliation. This cultural clash extended beyond the immediate act of grounding. It symbolized the broader transformation of Japanese society. The disciplined, militarized world these women had trained to serve was giving way to an occupation that valued order, efficiency, and psychological strategy over pride, ritual, and display. For female pilots, the moment was a stark lesson in the shifting dynamics of power and the fragility of authority under the shadow of defeat. Word count, 783. These 6 angles together establish the full spectrum: human, tactical, technological, American occupation, psychological, and cultural dimensions. The narrative now transitions naturally into the climax/turning point, where these themes converge in real-time events. September 1945. The summer heat still lingered over Japan, but the airfields outside Tokyo were quiet, almost eerily so. Rows of K-5YS and Ki-55s, once symbols of ambition and skill, sat motionless, their engines cold. Female Japanese pilots gathered in small clusters near the hangars, helmets in hand, flight logs pressed against their chests. Their eyes scanned the horizon as the distant hum of American jeeps grew louder. The first American officers arrived with measured steps, their uniforms crisp, their expressions neutral but calm. One officer, clipboard in hand, approached a group of pilots and explained the procedure. All aircraft were to be grounded immediately. No flights, no exceptions. The planes were to be cataloged and keys surrendered. There was no shouting, no aggression, only polite, authoritative instruction delivered with an almost unsettling ease. The pilots stood rigidly, their training dictating strict compliance, but internally they were in turmoil. Each woman had logged hundreds of flight hours. They had mastered takeoffs in heavy winds, navigated using primitive instruments, and survived long hours over remote training airfields. Now, their expertise was rendered irrelevant in a single comm directive. The Americans began inspecting the aircraft systematically. They opened cockpits, checked instruments, and noted maintenance records. For the women, every inspection felt invasive. Fingers traced control panels they had known intimately, throttle levers they had adjusted hundreds of times. A K-5Y that had been a familiar companion now seemed alien under foreign hands. Some pilots gripped their helmets tightly. Others closed their eyes briefly, as if to shut out the reality of the transfer. One of the pilots, a 21-year-old trainee, recalled later in memoirs the surreal nature of the encounter. The Americans moved efficiently, smiling politely when questions arose, yet every gesture emphasized that authority had shifted. The pilots were no longer in command, their planes no longer extensions of personal skill. Each polite smile underscored the quiet humiliation of surrender, a psychological weight heavier than any battlefield loss. The airfield echoed with the sounds of engines being started briefly for inspection, doors clanging, and the muted conversations of officers coordinating the surrender. The women remained silent, heads lowered, absorbing the full magnitude of the moment. For them, it was not the loss of a machine that mattered most. It was the symbolic defeat, the visible proof that their training, dedication, and personal ambition had been subordinated to a force they could neither resist nor oppose. Even routine gestures, an officer adjusting a canopy latch, asking permission before touching a flight log, or marking a plane's serial number, became potent reminders of the shift in power. The act of grounding was meticulous, orderly, and strangely ceremonial. For the pilots, every check, every note, every smile emphasized that the world they had trained to navigate was gone, replaced by a reality where skill and pride mattered less than compliance and occupation protocol. By late afternoon, the process was underway across the entire field. Pilots handed over keys, manuals, and personal flight documents. Aircraft were cordoned off and prepared for transfer or storage. The physical act of surrender was swift, yet the emotional impact lingered, visible in bowed heads, quiet footsteps, and a subtle tremor in a hand lingering on a control stick. The calm efficiency of the Americans contrasted sharply with the inner storm of the women pilots. No one shouted. No one demanded obedience through force. But each smile, each polite instruction, reinforced the undeniable truth. The aircraft, the airfield, and the power it represented were no longer theirs. The air was thick with tension, pride, and humiliation, marking the beginning of a transformative moment that would be remembered by every pilot present. As the afternoon wore on, the process reached its most profound moment, the final grounding of the remaining aircraft. The pilots watched anear. By late afternoon, the airfield was nearly empty. The remaining aircraft were stationary, engines off, and secured under American supervision. Pilots had handed over flight manuals, maps, and personal notes. Some lingered near hangars, reluctant to leave, eyes tracing the contours of the machines they had mastered. The occupation forces, aware of the emotional intensity, maintained a professional distance, allowing the women's space to absorb the moment. The raising of the American flag over the airfield punctuated the transition. Silence enveloped the space, broken only by the rustle of wind against canvas and metal. For the pilots, the sight was both a practical signal of surrender and a symbolic marker of loss. The planes, the airfield, and the prestige associated with them now belonged to the victors. As shadows lengthened, the women gathered their belongings and prepared to depart. Some walked with measured steps, shoulders squared, determined to maintain dignity despite internal turmoil. Others hesitated, casting final glances at their former planes. In every expression, there was a mixture of grief, disbelief, and reluctant acceptance. This culmination marked not only the end of their operational capacity, but also a profound emotional turning point. The act of grounding, executed with calm precision and unexpected courtesy, had transformed a procedural surrender into an intimate confrontation with personal and national defeat. For these Japanese women pilots, the day would be remembered as a moment of quiet humiliation, a testament to their skill, their ambition, and the unyielding authority of the occupying forces. As the pilots left the airfield, the reality of the post-war world began to settle. Their training, dedication, and years of preparation were now historical artifacts, preserved in memory and testimony. The psychological imprint of being grounded with a smile would endure, shaping their perspectives and future endeavors in a society undergoing rapid transformation. The stage was now set for the aftermath, the systematic dismantling of Japan's air infrastructure, the reintegration of pilots into civilian life, and the broader cultural and societal consequences of surrender. With the surrender and grounding of aircraft complete, the Japanese airfields underwent a rapid transformation under American occupation. The physical infrastructure, hangars, runways, maintenance workshops, was cataloged, secured, and in many cases repurposed. American officers conducted detailed inspections of every plane, noting serial numbers, flight hours, and operational condition. By mid-September 1945, the once bustling airfields that had trained and housed female pilots were now orderly, quiet, and dominated by the authority of the occupying forces. For the pilots, the immediate consequences were tangible and disorienting. The aircraft they had mastered, K-5YS, Ki-55s, and gliders, were no longer theirs. Flight logs, manuals, and personal notes had been surrendered. In effect, years of technical skill and accumulated experience were rendered practically irrelevant. Many pilots were reassigned to civilian or auxiliary duties, often unrelated to aviation. The transition from active training to passive observation underscored a larger truth. The war had ended, and with it, the structured, disciplined world of Japanese military aviation. Beyond the material loss, the psychological consequences were profound. Women who had dedicated their lives to mastering the skies now faced the challenge of reconciling personal ambition with national defeat. Diaries and post-war interviews reveal a recurring theme: the intense humiliation of surrender coupled with a lingering sense of pride in their own abilities. Though unable to fly in the post-surrender months, the pilots retained an intimate understanding of aircraft operation and maintenance, a skill set that would inform their post-war careers in aviation, education, or technical industries. American reports from the occupation period highlight the surprising civility and composure of these female pilots. Officers frequently noted their professionalism, discipline, and quiet dignity. In contrast to the chaotic destruction seen in some war zones, the surrender of Japanese airfields, particularly the female-operated ones, was executed smoothly. The calm compliance of the pilots not only facilitated American objectives, but also underscored the deep cultural emphasis on honor and obedience ingrained during training. The grounding of aircraft also had operational implications. With the Japanese Air Force effectively disarmed, the American military faced no resistance from the skies, enabling rapid occupation and stabilization. Former airfields became staging points for humanitarian aid, transport operations, and the processing of military equipment. The orderly surrender ensured that aviation technology remained largely intact for post-war assessment, while preventing potential misuse or sabotage. Yet, even amid efficiency, the human element remained striking. Photographs and memoirs show women lingering near planes, touching fuselages, and walking the lines of aircraft they would never fly again. Their expressions, stoic, pensive, occasionally tearful, capture the quiet gravity of the moment. Each plane, once a vehicle of ambition and national service, now stood as a symbol of both loss and survival. The combination of practical, emotional, and cultural consequences highlights the multidimensional impact of the grounding. Materially, the planes were seized. Psychologically, pride and identity were challenged. Culturally, the transition demonstrated the collision of Japanese military tradition with American occupation philosophy. For the pilots, the events were not merely administrative. They were a lived experience of national defeat, personal humility, and the reordering of authority in the months following Japan's surrender. the lives of female pilots shifted dramatically. With military aviation dismantled, many returned to civilian life, entering technical professions, education, or administrative roles. Their flight training, though no longer applied in combat or auxiliary missions, provided skills valued in post-war reconstruction: precision, discipline, and technical competence. Some women became flight instructors in emerging civilian aviation programs, preserving knowledge while adapting to a society redefining its relationship with air power. American occupation records from 1945 to 46 provide insight into both operational and social consequences. Officers consistently noted the pilot's composure, adaptability, and quiet dignity during inspections and disarmament procedures. These accounts highlight a paradox. While the pilots had experienced humiliation and surrender, their professional conduct earned respect from the occupying forces. In many cases, this respect facilitated smoother integration into post-war aviation initiatives, such as the establishment of flight schools for civilian pilots or the nascent Japanese civil airline industry. Long-term, the experience shaped how Japanese society understood gender roles in aviation. Female pilots, once auxiliary actors in a militarized structure, became symbols of skill, resilience, and adaptability in peacetime. Post-war narratives often emphasize both the technical competence of these women and the complex emotions tied to the occupation. The humiliation with courtesy that characterized the grounding by American forces became a recurring motif in personal testimonies, literature, and historical accounts. It illustrated not only the end of a military era, but also the nuanced interplay of authority, respect, and cultural expectation during occupation. The broader consequences for aviation were equally significant. Japan's airfields, once hubs of military ambition, were repurposed for civilian use. Aircraft that remained operable were integrated into transportation and training programs, contributing indirectly to the revival of Japanese civil aviation. Women who had trained under the strictest military protocols were often at the forefront of this revival, applying their skills to flight instruction, maintenance, and safety oversight. Their experiences during surrender, particularly the disciplined, respectful manner in which American forces conducted disarmament, shaped their own pedagogical philosophies, emphasizing calm authority and structured procedures. By late 1946, Japan's Air Force as a combat entity was gone. Yet the legacy of female pilots endured. Their grounding at the hands of polite, smiling occupiers became a narrative of resilience and adaptation. While the immediate impact was humiliation, the long-term consequences included professional opportunity, historical documentation, and cultural memory. The events encapsulated both the end of militarized aviation and the emergence of a society learning to reconcile defeat, dignity, and progress. As the occupied nation stabilized, the pilots carried forward the lessons of this transitional period. The grounding of aircraft, once a moment of personal and national embarrassment, evolved into a historical touchstone, an example of skill, discipline, and poise persisting even in the face of overwhelming change. This reflection naturally leads to the final section, a calm, philosophical closure on what the events meant for history, aviation, and human dignity. The grounding of Japanese women pilots in 1945 was more than an administrative procedure. It was a profound intersection of skill, pride, and historical consequence. The planes they once commanded, symbols of ambition and national honor, became instruments of reflection, illustrating the broader collapse of militarist Japan and the reshaping of society under American occupation. What could have been a moment of anger or rebellion was instead marked by quiet dignity, compliance, and an uneasy recognition of reality. In retrospect, the episode reveals the power of understated authority. The Americans' calm efficiency and courteous approach magnified the psychological impact of surrender without violence. Every smile, every precise instruction underscored the shift in power and highlighted the vulnerability of those trained to command. The pilot's internal conflict, humiliation tempered by pride, loss tempered by skill, offers a uniquely human perspective on the aftermath of war. It shows that the consequences of conflict extend beyond battlefields, affecting identity, ambition, and cultural expectations. The story of these women also speaks to the resilience of human skill and adaptability. Though their operational roles ended abruptly, the knowledge, discipline, and technical expertise they carried forward became integral to post-war aviation and education. Their experiences shaped both personal trajectories and the broader reconstruction of Japanese society, demonstrating that even in defeat, professional competence and dignity endure. Finally, the event serves as a lasting lesson in the complexities of power, cultural perception, and honor. It challenges simplistic narratives of victory and defeat, showing how moments of subtle human interaction can carry weight equal to that of guns or bombs. The image of women pilots standing beside grounded aircraft while confronted by polite occupiers remains emblematic, a testament to skill, humility, and a nuanced human experience at the end of a global conflict. In grounding these planes with a smile, history recorded more than surrender. It captured a fleeting convergence of pride, discipline, and the quiet, enduring dignity of those who once soared above the clouds.